realized something was wrong the moment he laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just casually, like it was obvious, like it was already decided. We were standing in the kitchen of his brother's condo in San Diego, the windows open, the smell of grilled fish drifting in from the balcony, and I felt my stomach drop before I even understood why. Someone had asked what I would do if we ever split up. It was said half as a joke, half as a curiosity, and before I could answer, he did it for me. He smiled and said she wouldn't survive on her own. And then he laughed again, softer this time, as if he had shared a harmless truth. I was standing right there, holding a glass of water I didn't remember pouring, realizing who I had given my career up for. I didn't react in that moment. I smiled too, reflexively, the way you do when you don't want to draw attention to yourself, when you're trying to stay composed even though something inside you just cracked. I told myself it wasn't the time, that I was overreacting, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded, but my body knew before my mind caught up. My chest felt tight, my face was hot, and there was a familiar sense of shrinking, of becoming smaller than I actually was. On the drive home later that night, he talked about traffic, about a client who was being difficult, about how tired he was. I stared out the passenger window at the blur of streetlights, and tried to remember when my life started to feel like this, like I was constantly translating myself into something more convenient for him. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had her own office key, her own calendar filled weeks in advance, her own sense of direction. I tried to line her up with the woman sitting quietly in the passenger seat, nodding at the right moments, and I couldn't make them match. When he got an opportunity to transfer to San Diego, it was framed as a big step for him, a chance to grow, to earn more, to build something long-term. We talked about it endlessly, sitting on our couch with maps pulled up on my tablet, imagining a different life by the ocean. He said it would be good for us, that the slower pace would give us more time together, that my skills were transferable anyway. I asked about my job, about the firm, about what would happen to my projects. He said we'd figure it out, that I could find something new, maybe even something better. I wanted to believe him, and more than that, I wanted to be supportive, to be the kind of partner who didn't hold someone back. He noticed, but not in the way I hoped. Instead of reassurance, he offered solutions that felt like judgments. Maybe you should aim lower for now, he said. Or maybe this is a sign you were burning yourself out before. He suggested I look into part-time work, or something less demanding, something that would leave me more energy for us. I nodded, told him he might be right, even as something inside me resisted the idea. Over time, his language shifted. He started referring to his income as ours, but in a way that felt uneven, like he was the source and I was the beneficiary. He would tease me about buying coffee, asking if it was coming out of my fun money or his, laughing when I rolled my eyes. When friends asked what I was doing these days, he'd answer before I could, saying she's taking it easy right now, enjoying a break. I told myself it was harmless, but I also noticed how my answers grew shorter, less specific, like I was slowly disappearing from my own story. The comment in his brother's kitchen brought all of that into sharp focus. She wouldn't survive on her own. The certainty in his voice scared me more than the words themselves. It wasn't just that he thought it. It was that he was comfortable saying it out loud, assuming it was true, assuming I agreed. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk alone. The air was cool, the sky just starting to lighten, and the streets were quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. I walked without a destination, letting my thoughts surface without pushing them away. I realized how dependent I had become, not just financially but emotionally, how much of my sense of worth was now filtered through his approval. The thought terrified me, but it also clarified something I had been avoiding. When I got home, he was already up, scrolling through his phone at the kitchen counter. He asked where I'd been. Casual, not unkind. I said I needed some air. He nodded, went back to his screen. I watched him for a moment. This man I had built my life around, and felt a strange mix of love and distance, like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. I didn't confront him right away. Part of me wanted to demand an apology, an explanation, some reassurance that he didn't really believe what he'd said. Another part of me knew that the truth was already there, woven into years of small moments I could no longer ignore. I started paying closer attention instead, noticing how often he interrupted me, how quickly he dismissed my concerns, how rarely he asked about my day unless it was to fill a pause in his own story. That night, I opened my laptop after he went to bed and pulled up my old portfolio, the one I hadn't touched in months. I updated it slowly, methodically, reminding myself of projects I had led, problems I had solved, value I had brought. With each bullet point, a small piece of myself clicked back into place. I didn't know yet what I was going to do or how, but I knew I could no longer accept the version of me he was so comfortable believing in. I thought again about that moment in the kitchen, the way his laugh had echoed in my ears, and realized it wasn't just humiliation I'd felt. It was grief. Grief for the partnership I thought we had, for the respect I thought was mutual. But underneath that grief was something else, something steadier. The knowledge that surviving on my own had never really been the question. The question was why I had started to believe him when he said I couldn't. The next day I scheduled a call with my old boss, just to catch up, I told myself. As the phone rang, my heart raced, my hands slightly unsteady. But when she answered, warm and familiar, I felt a rush of relief I hadn't expected. We talked about work, about the firm, about how things had changed. When she asked what I was up to now, I told her the truth, that I had moved, that I had stepped back, that I was ready to step forward again. She listened, really listened, and when she said we should keep talking, that there might be possibilities, I felt something open inside me. I hung up and sat there for a long time, the apartment quiet, sunlight pooling on the floor. I knew this wasn't the end of the story, not even close, but it was the beginning of something I had been putting off for too long. I stood up, closed my laptop, and for the first time since that laugh in the kitchen, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't require his permission to exist. I didn't tell him about the call right away, not because I was hiding something, but because I needed to understand what it meant to me before it became something he could comment on, minimize, or reshape. That evening he talked about his day as usual. A long explanation about a meeting that ran late, a colleague who annoyed him, a project that depended entirely on his decisions, and I listened the way I always had, nodding, asking the right questions, reacting in the right places. But something felt different inside me. I was listening from a slight distance now, like I had taken one quiet step back. Over the next few weeks, I made changes that were small enough not to alarm him, but significant enough to steady me. I woke up earlier, before he did, and spent that time working, updating my resume, researching firms in the area, reconnecting with people I had slowly drifted away from. I stopped asking him what he thought before making minor decisions, stopped explaining myself unnecessarily. When he noticed, he framed it as a joke, saying I was becoming mysterious, asking if I was joining a secret club. I laughed lightly and let it pass. The more grounded I became, the more he seemed unsettled. It showed in subtle ways. He started checking in more often during the day, asking where I was, what I was doing, even when I was just at home. When I mentioned an interview I had lined up, his first reaction wasn't congratulations, it was concern. He asked if the hours would interfere with our routine, if the commute would be too much, if I was sure I wanted to add that kind of stress back into my life. I told him I was sure, and meant it. The interview itself took place in a glass conference room overlooking downtown. The city stretched out beneath us like a living thing. As I spoke about my experience, about the work I loved, about the challenges I was ready to take on again, I felt something familiar return. A sense of competence, of clarity. When I walked out afterward, the sun felt warmer, the air lighter. I didn't know if I would get the offer, but I knew I had shown up as myself. When I told him how it went, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said he was proud of me, but his voice was flat, like he was reciting a line he knew he was supposed to say. That night, he was quieter than usual, distracted. I lay next to him in bed and realized that the dynamic between us was shifting, and not just because of me. It was as if my independence threatened a balance he had grown comfortable with. A few days later, he brought up the comment he had made in his brother's kitchen. He framed it as a misunderstanding, said he was joking. said I shouldn't take everything so seriously. He added that he had only meant that things would be hard for me at first, not impossible. I listened without interrupting, noticing how carefully he avoided apologizing. When he finished, I told him calmly that the words had mattered, that they had revealed something I couldn't unsee. He frowned, asked what I meant, accused me of reading into things. I didn't argue. I simply said I needed him to understand that I wasn't fragile, that I had built a life before him and could build one again. That was the first real silence between us, heavy and unresolved. In the days that followed, I noticed how often he tested me, making comments about how busy he was, how much he was carrying, subtly reminding me of his role, his contributions. I responded differently now, acknowledging his efforts without diminishing my own. The tension lingered, unspoken but present, like a low hum in the background. Then the offer came. It wasn't identical to my old position, but it was close enough, challenging, demanding, and meaningful. The salary was solid, the growth potential real. When I read the email, I felt a rush of excitement followed quickly by fear, not of the job, but of what accepting it would change. I knew that once I said yes, there would be no going back to the version of our relationship that depended on me being smaller. I accepted anyway. Telling him was harder than I expected. I waited until dinner, until we were sitting across from each other at our small kitchen table. I told him about the offer, about the role, about the start date. He listened, expression unreadable, then asked if I had already decided. When I said yes, his jaw tightened. He asked why I hadn't discussed it with him first. I told him I had considered his input, but the decision was mine to make. The words felt strange in my mouth, but also right. The argument that followed wasn't explosive. It was controlled, almost clinical. He talked about logistics, about how things would change, about whether this was really the best move for us. I talked about fulfillment, about identity, about needing to feel like myself again. At one point, he said he was worried I would outgrow him, and the honesty of that admission startled us both. I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at him, realizing how much fear had been hiding behind his confidence. We didn't resolve everything that night. Some things don't resolve neatly, but something had shifted permanently. I went to bed feeling exhausted, but grounded, aware that whatever came next would be different. On my first day at the new job, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting my jacket, my reflection unfamiliar but strong. As I drove to the office, nerves fluttered in my stomach, but beneath them was excitement, the kind that comes from stepping back into your own life. The day was long, intense, filled with introductions and expectations, but by the time I left, tired and exhilarated, I knew I had made the right choice. When I got home, he asked how it went. I told him honestly, sharing the details, the challenges, the moments that had made me feel alive again. He listened quietly, and when he said he was glad for me, I believed him more than I had before. Not because his feelings had suddenly changed, but because mine had. Weeks passed. We adjusted, or tried to. Some days felt almost normal, others strained. We had conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary, about respect, about partnership, about what we both wanted moving forward. I stopped shrinking myself to avoid conflict, and he had to decide whether he could meet me where I was or not. One evening, months later, we were walking along the waterfront as the sun dipped low, the sky streaked with orange and pink. He mentioned that he had told his brother about my new job, about how well I was doing. He said it casually, but I caught the note of pride in his voice. I nodded, appreciating the gesture without letting it define me. As we continued walking, I thought about that moment in the kitchen that had started all of this, the laugh, the assumption, the quiet dismissal. I realized then that giving up my career hadn't been the mistake. The mistake had been giving up my sense of self in the process. Reclaiming it hadn't just changed my future, it had clarified my present. I don't know exactly where our marriage will end up. Some questions take time to answer. But I know this now. I don't need anyone's belief in my survival to make it real. I had already survived, even when I was standing right there, silent, believing for a moment that I couldn't.